Good evening, everybody, wherever you may be, and welcome to the annual Architecture Drawing Prize webinar on behalf of the curators, Sir John Soanes Museum, Make Architects, and World Architecture Festival. The webinar precedes the opening of the exhibition of shortlisted and winning entries at the Soane Museum here in London, which takes place in 2 days' time. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Iris Ceramica, for their ongoing support, and our media partner, ArchDaily. This is a brilliant year, 2023. We had a record 242 entries, 95 hand-drawn, once again the biggest category, followed by hybrid with 77 and digital with 70. And we had a very enjoyable judging day at Make's office. And here's a reminder of this year's judges, if we can have that slide. Ben Langlands of Langlands and Bell, artist, and Nikki Bell further down that list. Federica Minozzi, who's CEO of the Iris Ceramica Group, our sponsors. Ken Shuttleworth, who founded the award, and we'll say something about that in a moment. Lily Jenks Studio and Jenks Squared, great landscape kind of proselytizer. Louise Stewart, who's with us today, head of exhibitions at the Soane Museum. Narinder Sagu, also with us, senior partner of Foster and Partners, in charge of all their visualizations. Nikki Bell of Langlands and Bell. Pablo Bronstein, artist. And me, Paul Finch, trying to herd the proverbial sheep. We had a very enjoyable day with our judging. What's going to happen this evening, we're going to have a word from Ken Shuttleworth about why this award and why Make founded it. And then we're going to run through each of the categories with the shortlisted entries and the winning entries. And we're in the happy position of having the 3 category winners with us this evening to say something about how they produced their rather extraordinary drawings. And at the end of the evening, we'll announce this year's overall winner. For those of you who may have trains to catch, we anticipate this lasting a little bit over an hour, somewhere between 60 and 70 minutes. With some conversation amongst the judges about the various entries. But first, let me invite Ken Shuttleworth, who conceived this award, to say a word about why he conceived it and say something about the award to date. Ken.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here today. We launched the idea of the Architecture Drawing Prize back in 2017. It's basically a prize that celebrates the sort of art and skill of architectural drawing. It's very important, I think, for architects to draw. But, we recognize there's also people who can draw on computers just as well as people who can draw by hand. So that's why we have the 3 categories and the overall winner that comes from those 3 categories. The idea was to sort of try and celebrate drawing on a sort of world basis. So we've got people from all over the world entering this prize, and it's become the best architecture drawing prize in the world, as you would expect. But it's important, I think, to think about the criteria for drawings and the reason for drawing and what they're actually trying to communicate. So for us, in its 7th year, I think it's fantastic. It's got such a fantastic audience. Further ado, let's look at some drawings. Thanks, Paul.
So first category, hand-drawn, and we can see the ones that are going to be shown at the Soane. Let's go through them one by one. And Ken, if you'd like to say something about each of these as we go through.
Just a fabulous, beautiful drawing by Alexander Varnick. I think the feeling of depth in this drawing, the sort of the way you just sucked into the drawing, gives you an incredible sense of place. It's a very secluded place in the woods with an architectural object right in the center. I think a very, very well composed drawing. And the next one is basically a totally different drawing. I think that's what's interesting about the hand-drawn section is they're all very, very different. This is by Luka Pajovic. It is the St Stephen Walbrook, which is a famous church in London by Wren. So worm's eye view looking up at the church, beautifully constructed. And what's interesting is the structure of the church is missing. So you just see the sort of inside of it, which I think is adds to its sort of poetry. And then the third one is very, very different. This is Alan Dunlop's sort of almost a painting, but also a drawing of the Glasgow School of Art when it caught fire. And obviously a very emotional moment, I think, in the history of Glasgow. And then also for Alan, who's obviously knows it very well and lives there, that drawing just sort of captures the sort of size of this fire that was there. And I think it's very evocative of, of what that horror was actually like. Paul.
Next, then the winner this year, he's been exhibited before, is Ben Johnson. It's a rather wonderful drawing of the Grumfig Church. And Ben, we're going to ask you to say something about the way you produce this wonderful piece. And you're on mute, so fire away.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Right. I'd like to just run through the first set of slides to give an idea of my background. I'm a painter, I work in a studio, I collaborate with other people. My subject matter and passion is architecture, big names, small names, and love the process. I love my instruments, I love the craft, both of painting and drawing, and the importance in my life of the sketchbook and sitting at a drawing board, investigating, exploring, experiencing, the making of marks. Now, this is my drawing. If we could just go back, please. This is my drawing of the Grundtvig Church. It was built in 1920 to 41, completed. It's made of 6 million bricks. The architect is Peder Jensen Klint. He died during the process of the building, and his son took over to realize his father's ambition. My reasons for making the drawing and the process: one, I discovered it just as an image. I then went to Copenhagen and spent many hours both in the building and photographing it. And then I returned to follow my instincts, and my instincts were to uncover the potent image. I was lucky enough to get the assistance of a brilliant student from the Royal College called Andres Sutu, who unfortunately is now back in Mexico. Otherwise, my studio would be an even richer person. But there, we reflected on what I'd found. We did further research, and we, using his appropriate and extraordinary computer skills, we recreated, both from the photographs that I'd taken and the original drawings, a 3D model. And with Andres's forensic approach and sensitivity to the development of the building, he saw that the architect's vision was modified by the mason. The mason and the architect worked together to improve on the original vision, and it exposes it through the computer model. So with this uncompromised perfection, I then set about traveling through the space until I found what I call the potent position, the position to stand in and find the meeting place of the geometries that bring a stillness and unity to the building. Now, could we move on with the slides, please? Thank you. John Soane was the fourth son of a bricklayer. I think that tells quite a lot. Now, the final stage of my drawing, of my process, was to now take all the information that had been gathered, recreate it onto the computer, and release it onto paper. For me, as a draftsman and an artist, it wasn't enough to leave it locked in to the computer. I had to choose paper, I had to choose pens and the colored ink, and then marks were scratched into the surface. I call this the alchemy of turning raw materials into an emotional response to a building. The drawing that is really the byproduct of a desire to celebrate both the subject and the craft of architecture. Also, celebrate drawing, research, collaboration, and the sharing of standards and ambitions, maybe not unlike what went on in John Soane's drawing office in the building where the exhibition is going to be held. And that was 200 years ago. And this enthusiasm, both for architecture, making, creating, and drawing, lies there today in many of the world's best architectural offices, but also in every artist studio. That's the end of my presentation. Could we go
Ben,
through the other
thank you
slides?
very much for that. And I'm going to invite Narinder and Louise and also Ken to make observations about what Ben has said, and indeed about the drawing itself. And let's freeze on that drawing for the discussion. Louise, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. So I think Ben made some lovely links to Soane's practice. And what's really interesting is that one of Soane's innovations is that he sent his students to building sites, to the buildings that he was constructing, that he designed, and asked them to draw them as a way of learning about construction, as a way of learning their craft as architects. And I think what's lovely about the shortlisted selection of hand drawings this year is that we see a similar, really detailed engagement with architecture, with the finest details of the building. I think all of these drawings have quite a meditative approach, whether that be in the way that Ben has depicted every single brick with loving care, or in something like Alan Dunlop's image of the Glasgow School of Art fire, which is done in a series. So we get this sense of meditation and attention to detail through repetition, or St. Stephen Walbrook with this incredibly detailed worm's eye view. They all share that sense of getting right down into the very detail.
Thank you very much. Narinder, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm big fan of this drawing as a piece of art, but I think it advocates a really strong message globally that architecture is not just about new additions to the planet, but it's, in terms of sustainability, it's about preserving and reusing existing buildings. And drawing, for me, should never really be seen as a tool for just presenting new ideas. In Ben's drawing, it analyzes every grain and every brick of this existing beautiful building and piece of architecture. And through drawing, I think you see more than you do through photography or through the human eye. And only then, through that act of seeing, I think you can then start to touch these older buildings gently to preserve them for the future. In fact, I think all the shortlists have something in common about the way we stand as architects in examining the way fire has destroyed a building, the environmental impact around us, the way understanding Wren's building from the ground up and seeing it in a new perspective, if only to I think admire its beauty or preserve it, and then that lovely soft pencil drawing that's so delicate, where the architecture nestles within the forest and just touches the earth very lightly. There's a really strong message of the state of architecture right now, and Ben's drawing just celebrates that beautifully, brilliantly.
Thank you very much. Ken, any further thoughts?
I think it's just interesting. All four are very different. I mean, they're all in a way hand drawn, very beautiful drawings, but they're all communicating different things. And I think what's interesting about this one, listening to Ben's description of it and Louise's analysis of it as well, this actually the messages that come from this particular drawing are very profound. And I think it actually adds to the understanding of this drawing, the appreciation of this drawing, the fact it has got a very strong message. So yeah, I think a very worthy winner.
Yes, it was an unusual category this year for a couple of reasons. Firstly, 3 of the shortlisted were British, which is, I think, the first time that's ever happened, because we get entries from between 30 and 40 countries from across the world. So that's sort of coincidental. And I should say that when we do our shortlisting, although we all knew this was a Ben Jonson because it's such a distinctive style, I mean, in general, we do not know who has done the drawing until we've compiled our shortlist, and then we look up the reference numbers to see if it's anybody we know. And I suppose the second unusual thing is that 2 of the drawings concern churches, but such a contrast between the kind of the materiality, if that's the right word to use, about Ben's drawing, and the kind of the sort of attempt to explain structure and space without too much structure. In the case of the drawing of St. Stephen Walbrook, with that marvelous up view technique. I wanted to finish this little section by asking you, Ben, of the drawings that have been exhibited in this competition in the past of yours. Is this one particularly different? What is sort of special in your mind about this one?
I wouldn't be able to separate the quality of any of them. All I can say is that because of the Architectural Drawing Prize and because of what was, well, it is now the Trinity Boy Drawing Prize, we have 2 people. We have Ken and we have Drawing Projects and Anita Taylor, bringing to the forefront the importance of drawing, which has so often been seen as something, oh, it's fine, it's preparatory to another experience, sculpting, painting, making art buildings. This is a wonderful, wonderful exhibition, and it's encouraging and placing importance on an activity which anybody can do. A cheap piece of paper, a pencil, make a mark, and you are literally, I am making a mark. I am here. I draw, therefore I am. So this is a continuation for me in realizing how important drawing is. And it's these 2 particular competitions that have continued to make me a student. And the day we forget being a student is the day that we should stop working. None of us can ever achieve anything better than being inquisitive and waiting for the next piece.
Ben, thank you very much. A lovely way to conclude that section of this evening. And we're now going to move on to the digital category. And the exhibited shortlist is here. And Narinder Sagu is going to say a little word about each of the shortlisted entries before we move on to a presentation of the winner. So let's have the first one, and Narinder, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, just overall, I'd just like to celebrate the fact that the digital has had so much variation in technique and overall kind of deliverance of artworks that we've judged. You'll see in these 3 shortlists that they're almost completely different, very similar to the hand drawing. And so the digital really is no different to the hand drawing in that it's a celebration of storytelling, layering and of information, and an assemblage that tells very complex stories in simple ways. And in overall kind of a beautiful way. And the digital is really just becomes another tool for us to step through complexity. And so the shortlists overall for me are fantastic because they're not taken over by the tool itself, but the tool is an enabler. This one by Tom Chan, I think, is incredible in the sense that it's almost thousands of pieces of information, thousands of pieces of three-dimensional forms displayed in a very simple single point perspective. And so in a sense, an incredibly complex assemblage with a very simple a message and a very simple kind of beauty to it with this one point perspective. But it's a kind of drawing you can look at for hours and hours and delve into that three-dimensional layering. The next drawing, I think, just based on what Ben has shown us, is again a digital drawing that has all the qualities of what one might expect with a hand drawing, this single line weight and of information, sometimes sparse, being confident enough to leave white space, sometimes quite complex in details, drawing you in. And then what I find really exciting is this assemblage of different architectural projections. So there's axonometrics, single point perspectives, and with a delicate border of nature around the outside. But you know, one could almost see this as a hand drawing, and I think that's the success of it. And then the next is almost it needs to be printed and examined, or I feel almost turned into, someone needs to turn this into a film. If architecture is all about people's lives, and in that sense, the architecture buildings is just a theatre around us. This describes a person's journey, people's journey through different spaces, almost like a film storyboard. And I think it's just absolutely stunning. This selection of desaturated kind of backgrounds and highlight of carefully controlled colors that draw you in and out through the layering. But then again, unlike a film storyboard, it's stitched together into a tapestry, a digital tapestry, and that's complex in itself. So really, really successful and absolutely beautiful piece of work. And then the final, the winner, I guess, is this wonderful piece of work by Eugene Tang, which again, in the theme of telling very complex ideas in a simple way, there's nothing more complex than the way the planet works. And this idea of bringing together many pieces of information, which are geographical, architectural, and then meteorological, again, going back to the idea of telling stories about climate and how that's affecting our lives in the past and certainly in the future. This is a layer that we as architects must have a medium, a way of communicating and a way of displaying. So this does that absolutely beautifully within this quite unusual but beautiful projection of a circle and various points of perspective around it. But it's really, really complex.
That's great. And we're
beautiful.
lucky enough to have Eugene Tan with us, zooming in from Singapore. So Eugene, give us a presentation of how you produced this rather wonderful drawing, or I should say series of drawings.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Narinder. So this drawing was actually part of my university thesis project, and it was really about reimagining the past, present, and future of Petra Branca. So the image you see now is an image of Petra Branca as it is today. Mark. Yeah. So a bit of context about Petra Branca. So the island is located approximately 24 nautical miles off Singapore's eastern coast. You can see it in this little red circle here. Yeah, so it has been the subject of a territorial dispute between Singapore and Malaysia. And as a result of this political event, Petra Branca was designated as a protected site in the 1980s. So on the right, you can actually see this territorial map. And this is how a protected place is represented in Singapore. It's just this bare island with this line that's drawn abstractly across. And this has actually framed how we would think of the site for the past 20 years. So this is another image of Pedra Branca, and it really shows how it has developed as a military site for over the last 20 years. And that was the question that I asked for this project. Is this the only future for such disputed islands whose value lie in their strategic locations or their raw materials? Next. So without access to the site, so I had to look at several archival materials. Next, please. So in that sense, the thesis was really questioning about the representations of Pedra Branca and how land is portrayed as territory in Singapore. So as a result, this way of seeing will become a record of its past, but also frame the way we think about its future. As part of this speculative project, I proposed a landscape that showed the ecology and site conditions of Pedra Branca. So it is from this spatial rethinking of the island that led me to this drawing. Next, please. Next. Next, Mark. Yeah, so the drawing was primarily inspired by the medieval Mappa Mundi. So I have two examples of it on the screen now. So what inspired me was that these maps illustrate not just space, but also experience and narratives that are associated with that particular place. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, so these maps allow me to think about how this incredibly political site could be reframed. And I'd like to briefly talk about the 6 layers that form the drawing. Next, please. Yep. So beginning from the inside, I actually explored the 3D proposition of it by semi-distorting the aerial view of it. So from this 3D model, I projected it in many different ways, looking at different modes of representation. Next, please. So I was particularly inspired to find this silhouette of, I wanted to find a particular symbol that was strong enough that would represent the island. And in this case, I actually landed on what was the shape of a bird, which would form the core of the image later on. And this bird is actually a native species called the bridal tern. That was actually one of the few resident bird species on the island. Next, please. So this first layer, describes that proposition of the island as a landscape in the shape of tern. Next. Yeah. So next. So after I explore, so I wanted to really explore this idea of time into the drawing, as Narendra had mentioned earlier on. So in this sense, I explored like the idea of the monsoon and its relationship with the island, particularly how this island really could be divided into like 4 major seasons. We have the winter monsoon, we have and we have the summer monsoon, and we have the 2 seasons in between. And I took these 12 quadrants. Next, please. And took the section that I've drawn and divided it into 12 equal sections to explore the relationship of the island and its and the monsoon. Next, please. So when I took it back to the drawing, this circular composition then allowed me to frame it into a form of a cycle. So dividing this drawing into 12 quadrants, each quadrant will represent a month, and then I could then relate how I could then signify how the site will relate to time and space. Next, please. So as I mentioned, the island is actually part of this larger geopolitical context of disputed islands. Next, please. So in that sense, I was also interested in exploring not just this island by itself, but also how other disputed islands would relate to this larger political narrative. Next, please. So from these are actually the few islands that I've identified as the politically significant ones, which would frame this entire political narrative that I really wanted to talk about. This whole idea of disputed islands and talk about how they are being represented today. Next. Next, please. So one of these other ways was also to imagine like the materiality of the site, because as I I couldn't really go there to conduct like tests on the island. I had to like imagine how the material of water, the material of tides would interact with the island. So I created this tiny scale model, if you can see from one of these tiny key images at the top. And then I explored how at different tidal levels, how could I symbolize the idea of the ephemerality of water? And through it, I created this drawing that you see below. And this represents the different layers of water on the island. And I thought it was really, really part of representing this island. So next, please. So that's how I came to this layer of representing this the relationship with water and the island, the different heights and levels, and trying to speak about this transient quality of water. Next, please. Next, please. And so lastly, I really want to talk about this, the concept of curated decay. So part of the proposition involves embedding this pulse into the iconic Hotspur Lighthouse, which is the lighthouse that you see at the center of the island, as well as all around in the drawing itself. Really, I wanted to reflect on the idea of how small interventions could create massive reactions. And in particular, like responding to heat, to rusting, to different site conditions. I really wanted to try to talk about this. Next, please. And so this outer ring kind of is the manual in a sense, talking about the future from today to 30 years down the road, what would happen to the lighthouse. It dictates the steps for how I imagine this lighthouse could be collapsed. So next, please. Next, please. So finally, so this outermost ring, which we'll go on to see in a second, is meant to talk about the relationship of the map as a wayfinding tool. So in particular, what you have, what I'm showing here on screen is a previous prototype that drew on similar principles. Here, the physical map actually acts as an intervention that talks about the relationship between the drawing and what it's representing. Next, please. I wanted to create this visual relationship between the island and its surroundings. So for the goal was for the viewer to be able to imagine their surroundings as they walk around the map. So you kind of use the circular composition, you move around it. And at each point, the corresponding landmarks that you see on the drawing will create this panorama of what surrounds the site. And here, I wanted to share the experience of how I understood the site at a distance, at the same time to create this ability for people who have not visited the site to be able to understand what it was like. And in doing so, create like this relationship between drawing and this visual relationship of what the situation of the site is. Next, please. So yeah, so this was the drawing of like all the landmarks and how at the center you have the island, and so you're meant to see it all around. Next, please. So to conclude, the drawing was really a way to deconstruct the way these protected sites are represented. I was reacting primarily to the sanitized and redacted representation of land as territory. Next, please. So the drawing, in essence, it's really reflecting on this rich and vibrant ecology of these disputed sites. And my choices here were really to illustrate the life of these islands instead of that precise representation that we had previously. And I really in doing so, I hope that they would subvert the political associations that are so intertwined with the narrative of this island, and to allow more people to imagine what the future of these islands could be. Yeah, that's all.
Eugene, thank you very much indeed. What an intriguing process, starting from one of these sort of disputed military sites to ending up with a rather optimistic and a cheerier view of what might be. Let's get a comment from Louise and Ken about the digital winner and this category. Louise, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, I think the lovely thing about this category is that a lot of the shortlisted entrants have used very traditional conventions of architectural drawing, the topographical view, axonometric views, and of course the Mappa Mundi here. And they've done that to kind of imagine these futures in a very creative way. So we get this marriage of sort of very futuristic ideas of how the world might look with these more conventional forms of drawing. And I think that just sort of enhances the creativity of these shortlisted entries and breathes new life into these traditional modes of drawing. So I thought that was really lovely to see. And this drawing in particular, in the way that it uses the Mappa Mundi form to create something that's so complex and so multi-layered, and yet the viewer can go through this lovely rich journey of decoding it. It makes it a very rewarding visual experience, I think.
Thank you very much. Ken?
I think what's amazing is the restraint on the colours. You think about the subject matter, it's about conflict and war, and between what's happened, in the history of that area. And what you've got here is a very beautiful drawing. I mean, if this was a hand drawing or painting, it would still be just as beautiful. I think that sort of restraint, added to this the layering, is really giving you the story of the island, the story of the whole area. I think it's remarkable. So I think it's again a very worthy winner. But I think for me the restraint on the colouring is exceptional.
Thank you very much. Narinder, any final comments on the winner and indeed the category?
I think, well, I don't want to repeat what Louise and Ken just said, but Louise touched on something really important, that we often judge the future through these conventional means, and it just made me think that that said, it's interesting how in a drawing like Eugene's, there are rules that are broken as well. You're telling a story of a future that doesn't exist. And so to use those conventional projections, architectural projections and methods are great for level of understanding, but to encourage breaking rules, to tell stories of things that don't yet exist. I mean, in a world where we're kind of in parallel and embracing other technologies, including AI, I think these shortlists and Eugene's incredible kind of winning piece shows that as humans we can embrace digital. The digital hasn't taken over the connectivity, the mind to hand connectivity, and that beauty of hand drawing that we still enjoy. And the lesson here is that whatever comes our way, whether it's artificial intelligence, that we need to use the actual intelligence to interpret it and keep control of it. But this celebrates that incredibly well. So congratulations, Eugene.
Yeah, an interesting point, because I think that when over the years, as we've looked at the digital category, I think there was a bit of a fear in the early couple of years that somehow digital technology would replace hand drawing in its entirety, and that somehow there would be a sort of uniformity of approach and everything would be the same. And far from it. And I think what's extraordinary in this this group of exhibition drawings, as you said at the start of this, Narinder, is how different they are. I mean, thinking of the sort of 1,000 images with the sort of faint hint of Nelson's column in the background in that first one, couldn't be more different from this kind of worldview, taking sort of a medieval basis, and yet using the 21st century technology in a very, very creative way. I think over the years, I think we've become more encouraged by difference and variety, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we probably draw more by hand than we've ever done before, even though we have all these digital tools at our disposal. And we go through generations where I think Ken and I, when we work together, people would say, what are you going to do when the digital takes over, when the computer can do what you do? And that just hasn't happened. And if it has happened, I think it's our opportunity and our responsibility to embrace whatever's coming our way. And so in a sense, I think whatever is coming our way, you've got to see it as a prosthetic. And I refer to it as a creative prosthetic. So it's not something that replaces, but it's something that just makes you that much better. But the skill is always to have this kind of human touch and control and personality. And so I think with all these digital winners, you could almost not tell that they're digital. Even the Nelson's column could have been an incredible assemblage of a collage, and this and the previous drawing could certainly have been hand drawn, ink on paper, watercolor, airbrush. So it's much to be celebrated, I think.
And of course, as you might expect, the judges have already started discussing the implications of AI for drawing. And I think we're approaching this in a confident mood rather than a fearful one, on the basis of the remarks that Narinda's made about embracing rather than resisting, and actually looking to see how technology can enhance, complement, disrupt in a creative way the way we do existing things. Let's move on to our final category, which is hybrid. And we've got the exhibited shortlist here, and to run us through that, Louise, take us through the three shortlisted.
Thanks, Paul. And of course, by hybrid, we mean these works which combine the hand-drawn and the digital. So in some senses, these hybrid drawings have access to such a wide range of languages, of visual languages, that makes them really exciting. And we've got a lovely selection of three included in the exhibition this year. We were particularly impressed with this drawing and its immersive nature. And please do come to the exhibition, because this drawing is really large in scale, and you get the sense that you can just step into this scene. So this drawing imagines the Royal Albert Docks in Liverpool in the year 2200, I think, where this historic site has become a form of museum. And so in the foreground, we can see these museum type displays, all of the architecture lit like some sort of historic attraction. And actually, I think this scene is almost completely devoid of people. And I think this drawing makes a very pointed reference to the ways in which our cities are developing, and the question about what our cities are for. Are they actually places for people to live in anymore, or are certain cities and certain areas of cities just becoming tourist attractions? And the image looks very enticing at first glance, very pristine, but actually when you look closely at some of the details, we can see signs of decay. There are ruined statues, there's grass growing on some of these structures. There's a skull as well, which looks like a sort of memento mori. So there's a sense that in creating this museum of a city, it's being left to decay, and it's being neglected. It's no longer functioning as it should. And the other thing to say about this is it's called a capriccio, which feels very fitting for the Soane Museum, because capriccio, which is a mixture of real and fantasy architectural elements, is something that Soane created, and he also collected a number of these images as well. So we have lots of them in the collection. So it's really nice to see this contemporary reimagining of this particular form. So if we move on to the next image, the urban anthroscape, again, another criticism really of the way in which our cities function. In this case, thinking about how they seem to prioritize cars a lot of the time over people. And there's a sense that cities can feel like alienating spaces for people. This image reimagines what cities could be, creating this wonderful pedestrianized area in which there's all kinds of social life happening, and the cars have become a sort of ornamental aspect of the city. Again, this drawing is really large in scale, it's quite immersive, and what's particularly lovely about it actually are the really luminous colors and the crispness of the drawing. The composition for me is also incredibly successful. It really draws you in, and it makes a very strong architectural proposition in terms of the function of our streets and our cities. So this is another really lovely image, and if you spend some time again looking at the details, it's actually a very witty image, and really rewards close looking. And then if we move on to the final image, Remembering the Sea Monster, by Eldridge John. This is an incredibly detailed image. It began as a hand drawing, and then it's been manipulated using Photoshop. And we can see the artist here using techniques of collage and montage and repetition to really experiment with thinking about that structure and how it works, but also how drawing works. And you can see the way the drawing sort of in the mid left-hand side section breaks down into diagram. So really starts to think about the different modes of communication that we can use to convey information about buildings. A really beautiful and a very complex drawing. And I think that's why it's been selected as the winner of the hybrid section.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got Eldridge John Infante with us. So Eldridge John, give us a presentation of this lovely work.
Thank you very much, Paul and Louise. So this is the subject of my work, the Sea Monster, which is an oil rig from the North Sea transported to England in 2022 for the Unbox Festival. It was converted into a temporary public space that promoted regeneration, sustainability, and an example of how creativity champions the reuse of inherited structures. It was erected in Weston-super-Mare on a very pristine beach. It has this very stark contrast to its landscape being 35-meter tall structure. And because of its very interesting build and intentions, I was inspired to illustrate it. Illustrating built works is a very relaxing way to study structures, admire them, and build relationships with them without being physically on space. Drawing for me is a way to react. And upon completion of the manual work, I reflected on how I could further enhance the storytelling capability of the drawing. So I scanned it for me to digitally manipulate it, taking the concept of reuse. This time, my inherited structure is my manual drawing. And the main charge for this narrative exploration is the unexpected public perception the monster received. The efforts and concepts were shadowed by the delayed construction, budget, people seeing it only as a big chunk of steel. So the early explorations were about distortion, stacking, and repetition. So go back one slide, please. And the next. So the structure, next. Yeah, so the structure was seen through a kaleidoscope, repeated many times and fragmented. And after these explorations, I decided to keep the manual drawing intact and produce frames of narratives, which are compositions from parts of the manual work to tell selected episodes when the sea monster was still alive or built on that beach. This is the completed work, and I'll walk you through the frames which are grouped at the bottom of it. The first frame is a representation of the time when it was still an oil rig in the North Sea, extracting resource on the seabed. This frame, on the other hand, expresses time. I used a progress sketch on top of the finished manual drawing to express progress. This is a timetable for the delayed construction of the sea monster, which is a source of criticism as well. This one is an abstraction of the site or the beach where it stood, and the engagement it received during its short 8-week run, which is, again, too short after the resources used to build it. Another criticism was it looms over the beach, so I wanted to represent it through a series of stutters, an image of how it clouds the landscape, how it grows and looms over your vision. This frame is a collage of the manual drawing to depict the old structure, which is the 4 columns that you see on your left, and the lighter new additions to it, which are the 4 next one. One specific addition, this image on the screen, was a podcast booth. So this abstraction depicts the presence of the structure on air and online. And lastly, as the sea monster closes and is dismantled, you can see here the trees that will be replanted to a local garden as part of the structure's legacy and continued story for community and tourists. In conclusion, the work seeks to assist or expand the narrative and incite discussion about the specific structure. Drawing is not just documentation, it's a form of preservation, and it can hold a wealth of data. This is very evident in the winning works this year. Drawing is a skill that enriches our understanding as artists and architects, which is a medium to communicate observe, and reflect on. Thank you, everyone.
Eldridge, thank you very much for that. And I'll ask Ken and then Narinda to say something about the winner, and then bring Louise back in. Ken, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's extraordinary, I know this speech quite well, and the only thing on it at the moment are donkeys. So it's actually to see this thing on the beach would have been amazing. I'm sorry I missed it. But actually, I think the drawing, is giving you such an evocative feeling of what it must have been like. Absolutely phenomenal, idea. And I think, going back to some of the earlier comments, I mean, whether it's a hand drawing, whether it's a digital drawing, whether it's one between the two, it doesn't really matter. It's about the narrative that goes with it, quality of the visual image, and the story, which is giving you this sort of sense of time and space, which is this image is all about. So I think it's fantastic drawing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Narinda.
Yeah, I love all of these hybrids, and I think what occurs to me, and I think it's highlighted in the way Eldridge just presented it, is that you start with a hand drawing that has a fixed scale and a presence on the drawing board or the table, and then once it enters the digital world, in a sense, the digital drawing can become limitless in its scale. And the challenge as architects, not just through representation through architectural drawing, but through designing through architectural drawing, is to be conscious of that scale. So when architectural drawings were purely done on paper, there would be a fixed scale, and your level of thinking would be fixed as well. Hybrid gets best of both, really, because Eldridge has just shown us how there's a consciousness of the original, and then the digital really is again another tool that we use to explore that drawing in different ways and manipulate it to tell different stories. So it's a real success, I think, for all the entries in hybrid. But I'm so glad as a drawing prize we have this hybrid category, because it really embraces the best of both. But it's a beautiful drawing. I really love the way it sits, the way the density of line work you've chosen beyond that original piece, the way you've described it and displayed it digitally on the piece of paper, the level of densities of ink and that whiteness that surrounds the overall perspective at the top is super successful. Again, the success is always that you tell all your stories and give all your messages, but at the end of the day, what's on the paper is beautiful to everyone, and it obviously shows here. So congratulations, Eldridge.
Thank you very much. Well, before bringing Louise back in, I think we should probably announce the overall winner of the 2023 Architecture Drawing Prize, and it is indeed the winner of the hybrid category, Remembering the Sea Monster by Eldridge Infante. So Louise, say something about this year's overall winner, and perhaps about the exhibition that's going to open to the public at the Soane in a couple of days' time.
Well, I think what's lovely about this piece as the overall winner is that it really encapsulates something that makes it an absolute privilege to be a judge of the Architecture Drawing Prize, and that's the thoughtfulness and the sheer level of engagement with architecture that is behind a lot of these drawings. It was absolutely fascinating to me, Eldridge, to hear your presentation and the different concepts behind the sections in this drawing. And I think that sense of thoughtfulness and complexity is very well expressed in this piece, and that's what we all respond to, and that's why it was selected as the overall winner, as well, of course, as the sheer technical skill on display here. And I do hope that as many of you as possible come to see the drawings in real life, as it were, at Sir John Soane's Museum, printed large scale, or indeed the original hand drawings, as some of them are, because they really do reward long looking, and they make a really fascinating group, a very varied group, but one which I think conveys all the the richness and possibilities inherent in architectural drawing.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, a chance for any other final comments from Narinder and Ken. But before that, I've got a question for you, Eldridge, which is, can you tell us how you came to be involved with this beach project in the west of England? Because I know you're from the Philippines. Were you a student? Did you just get interested in the idea of it?
Yeah, actually, I'm currently an architect in the Philippines, and I was not part of the team that created it. It was a reaction to a built work, to the ideals that it has, that it wants to express, and at the same time, this very varied public perception that it receives. It really shows how when we put out the work, especially all our architects and designers, that we have to really be careful of the people who are going to in a way to interact with it. It's a really great way to reflect on the impact of the industry, and at the same time reflect on the impact of these structures, as they called it, inherited structures to our environment. So it was really a reaction and a way for me to study and engage with the structure.
Thank you very much. Any final comments, Narinder?
I just want to congratulate everyone. I want to thank WAF and Ken, because and all the judges, because we've been doing this for 7 years now, and every year is just extraordinary to see the level of quality of drawings that come in, but to make our life as judges so pleasurable every single year. It's really become one of my favorite events in the entire year. But I'm really, really looking forward to next year. Encourage as many people to enter, and let's all keep celebrating drawing globally together. It's just wonderful to see. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ken.
Just to echo what everybody said, I think it's a fantastic year. It's just been great to see the drawings going in 3 categories. Ben's drawing is remarkable. So is Eldridge's, and so is Eugene's. I think it's fantastic to see them all, and I'm looking forward to seeing them at Soane, Louise. Soane is amazing. It's actually they're that big, because when we judge them, you never really know how big they really are. There's also one question I noticed in the notes saying, somebody says, can we submit a drawing in AutoCAD only? I think the answer to that is yes, in the digital category. So it's on the questions board. I don't know if you saw it, but I think fantastic.
Yeah, I think, yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the digital category.
Yeah.
But of course, there's always the possibility of hand-drawn additions, or painting, or overlays, or anything else. As we were saying earlier, I think the big debate is going to be how we deal with the inevitable use of AI in drawings. And it's not giving any secrets away to say that we've already had the discussion about, well, should there be a category for AI drawings, or should we just simply ask people to say if they've used AI in their work, whichever category they've entered, and if so, how so? I think the main thing is to stay kind of positive and embrace creativity on this. Louise, would you like to comment on this as a sort of closing remark?
Absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, I think AI is another tool at the disposal of the artist, and it will be really interesting to see how in the coming years it is used. So I'll be fascinated to see whether we do now begin to get entries which are using AI as another digital tool.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a positive note to end on. I'm looking forward very much to the Soane exhibition, which is always beautifully curated and hung, and is a real treat. So if you're in London, or if you're visiting London in the next 2-3 months, make a point of getting along there. As Narinder said, we welcome entries in any category from anybody all over the world. And capriccio could, I guess, mean something we don't see very much of, which is the sort of fast interpretive sketch or sketch design, which is as welcome as really complex worked through drawings. Well, on behalf of Make and Sir John Soanes Museum and World Architecture Festival, can I thank everyone who's been watching for your attendance, thank ArchDaily, our media partner, and in particular thank Iris Ceramica Group for their ongoing support. We hope you've enjoyed the evening. Congratulations to Ben and Eugene and Eldridge John, who we thank for their contributions. And we hope to see you, if not before, then roughly this time next year. Thank you very much. And from a rather wet but not too cold London, good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.